A man only had to look at them to know that they were not like other men. Their eyes, their hair, their very being, all proclaimed their differences. And they flew dragons. Gildane, writing about the doctrine of exemptionalism, fire and blood, a time of testing, the realm remade. When we think about the history of Aegon's conquest, it's very easy to forget that House Targaryen, maybe thousands of years before Aegon and his sisters landed on the shores of Blackwater Bay, they had a long and proud history that has been overshadowed by the seismic event that was the conquest of Westeros. House Targaryen and its history is rightly defined by Aegon due to the sheer impact he and his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, had upon the world. But that does not mean we should dismiss all that came before them, even if much of their story has been lost to the fires of old Valyria. The history of pre-Aegon House Targaryen has as much of a role to play due to the simple fact that events transpired the way they did thanks to what came before Aegon, and it allowed his conquest and the reshaping of the world as we know it. To fully understand this story, we must get to know how the dating system in Westeros works. The maesters of the Citadel in Old Town, who have kept the histories of Westeros since long before Aegon even looked west, have used the conquest as their starting point for dating for the past 300 years. Thus, we will be using the same dating system. AC referring to dates after Aegon's conquest, and BC for events that happened before it. It would be prudent at this stage to rightly point out that like most of Targaryen history, especially pre-conquest, the dating system is far from accurate. Most of the conquest itself took much longer than a single day, with more than 2 years passing between Aegon's initial landing and its completion, with it even then remaining technically incomplete. While the day that Aegon first landed on the shores of Blackwater Bay is celebrated by his descendants, the dating system starts from the day he was crowned and anointed High King of Westeros in the Starry Sept in Old Town by the High Septon of the Faith of the Seven, which took place 2 years after his landing. Thus the conquest itself, like all of Targaryen history before it, took place between 2 and 1 BC. All Valyrian sorcery was rooted in blood or fire. The sorcerers of the Freehold could see across mountains, seas and deserts. With one of these glass candles, they could enter a man's dreams and give him visions, and speak to one another half a world apart, seated before their candles. Maester Marwyn to Samwell Tarly, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 45, Samwell 5. The Targaryens were of pure Valyrian blood, dragon lords of ancient lineage dating back possibly thousands of years. While they were among the prominent houses of old Valyria, they were on the smaller end of the scale. While rich and prominent by Westerosi standards, in Valyria they would have been counted among the more minor houses. At its apex, Valyria was the greatest city in the known world, the centre of all of civilization. Within its shining walls, 40 rival houses vied for power and glory in court and council, rising and falling in an endless battle for dominance. Valyria was ruled by its dragon lords, as it was in truth the dragons which gave them their power. But they were more than dragon lords. They practiced blood magic and other dark arts, delving deep into the earth for secrets and twisting the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras. It is believed it was for these very sins the gods in their wrath struck Valyria down. The Valyrian Empire, the Freehold, first conquered the old empire of Gis across Slaver's Bay, and then the Giscari colonies in the Basilisk Isles and Sothorios, seeking slaves for the Valyrian mines. They then conquered and established colonies to the west and north after defeating the Andals and the Rhoynar in Essos. It was the 40 dragon-riding families who controlled the thousands of dragons, and thus they lived in the Freehold itself, and in the lands of the long summer. Some dragon lords occasionally visited the colonies of Valyria, most notably Lys, which they founded and used as a pleasure retreat, but they never settled there permanently. The Valyrians are said to have used binding spells and horns to control their dragons, and they used dragon flame to reshape stone into decorative shapes, an art that has now been lost. At its peak, the dragon lords of old Valyria ruled over most of Essos. While House Targaryen were among the lesser of these dragon lords, they were dragon lords nonetheless. A racial characteristic among the Valyrians appears to have been various shades of purple eyes and hair of silver gold or platinum white. Valyria is said to hold many treasures from before the Doom, such as Valyrian steel blades that become precious across the world, and items of immense magical power. It is said the glass candles of Old Town were brought there from Valyria 1,000 years before the Doom. But this great empire, the like the world had never seen before, would be struck down in a matter of moments to nothing but ash. Almost everything was destroyed. The proudest city in all the world was gone in an instant. Its fabled empire vanished in a day. The lands of the long summer scorched and drowned and blighted. The thoughts of Tyrion Lannister. A Dance with Dragons, Chapter 33, Tyrion 8. 12 years before the Doom of Valyria, in 114 BC, Aenar Targaryen, later known as Aenar the Exile, the head of House Targaryen, shocked his peers when he abruptly sold his holdings in the freehold and the lands of the long summer, offering no explanation. His rivals saw it as a victory, and that House Targaryen could no longer compete in the dangerous game of Valyrian politics. What must have seemed even stranger to the other Valyrian families at the time is that Aenar relocated his wealth, slaves, dragons, kin and children to Dragonstone, a bleak island citadel beneath a smoking mountain in the narrow sea off the eastern coast of Westeros, an old Valyrian stronghold and the westernmost point of their empire. It is only in hindsight that we know the truth of Aenar's bold action. His maiden daughter, Daenys, known to the history books as Daenys the Dreamer, had foreseen the destruction of Valyria by fire. Aenar heeded his daughter's warnings, and thus 12 years after her dream, when the ground cracked and Valyria burned, House Targaryen were the only dragon lords to survive. They were not the only Valyrian house to survive the Doom. House Velaryon of Driftmark and House Celtigar of Claw Isle had been minor houses in Valyria who had relocated to the shores of the Narrow Sea long before House Targaryen. But these houses were not dragon lords, rather humble traders with vast fleets. Thus, when Aenar first moved to Dragonstone, he found in these lesser houses fast allies whom would help House Targaryen to control Blackwater Bay and the Gullet, making them even richer in the process via the passing trade. The Velaryon ships, along with those of House Celtigar, dominated the Middle Reach and the Narrow Sea, while the Targaryens ruled the skies with their dragons. It was this small power base that over time would allow House Targaryen to gain influence and power. Even so, this new position of power they held as Lords of Dragonstone was nothing compared to all they'd given up when they left Valyria to its doom. But they held one huge asset, and would choose to use them wisely. They controlled the last living dragons. With dragons, almost anything was possible. In the power vacuum Valyria left, House Targaryen were in a prime position to fill it, given they were the only dragon lords left in the world. But they took very little interest in what became known as the Century of Blood that followed the Freehold's downfall. Even so, at this time their focus was still pulled to the east and Essos, rather than the west and the warring kingdoms of Westeros. While we know of the Targaryen lords who followed Aenar after his death, we know very little about their actions and deeds due to how they isolated themselves to operations around Blackwater Bay and western Essos. Aenar's son would become Lord Dragonstone after his father's death, and for deeds unknown, he earned the title Gaemon the Glorious. Given incestuous marriages were common in Valyria, Gaemon was married to his sister, Daenys, the same Daenys who dreamed of the coming doom. Their son, Aegon, would inherit after his father's death, and like his parents, was married to a sister, Aelena. After Aegon, the lordship passed to their son, Maegor, who died before marriage or procreation of any heirs. Thus his brother Aerys inherited the lordship. Aerys married a woman whose name has now been lost to history. However, they did have 3 sons, Exile, Balon, and Damian, who each inherited after the elder brother's subsequent death. Damian's son, Aerion, became lord after his death. He would go on to marry Valyria Velaryon, whom herself was half Targaryen via her mother. Aerion would have 3 children. First would come a daughter, they named Visenya, born in 29 BC, a son, Aegon, born in 27 BC, and Rhaenys, born in 25 BC. Little did anyone know at the time that these 3 children would go on to become the 3 heads of the dragon who would become the greatest power Westeros had ever seen. But Aerion had one other son, a black-haired bastard, born on some unknown woman. The boy was named Orys Baratheon, who, just like his trueborn half-siblings, would leave a sizable impact on Westeros.